Good evening and welcome to the Path of the Just. We're continuing our journey. We're talking about a very non-PC subject called the fear of sin. Yiras Achet. As we said before, that Yiras Achet is a very high level. It's not the fear of punishment. It's a constant awareness that a person has that Hashem is everywhere and that Hashem sees everything. This is a very high level because it's not something intuitive. It's something that a person has to work on all the time. He has to constantly bring to his mind the fact that there's a Kadosh Baruch Hu in the world, that he fills the whole world, that he's awesome beyond any form of awe, and that he sees everything, he knows everything, and he sees my thoughts, he says everything I do. And that's something that is not intuitive. So we started off last week talking about that, and as we said just now, I'm going to start with the paragraph. This is something which doesn't necessarily impress itself on the conscience of a person, unless, as I said, alidei hasmadat hasbonenus vehistaklus hagodol, only through constant contemplation and intense reflection on these truths. It's something which is not, easily accessible by our five senses. It requires dimion, it requires the power of the mind to conjecture. And in point of fact, that's why we have the power of conjecture, the power of dimion, the power of imagination. The power of imagination is specifically used that we can, as much as humanly possible, imagine these ideas which are abstract, the idea of a being who is everywhere. It's not something that you can see with your eyes, but with your mind's eye, with practice, and as he says, with hasmada, it's possible to do this. Of course, again, we're talking about people on a very, very, very high level. However, this is something that requires constant effort, constant work, as we said. As we said, just as a great deal of contemplation is the way to acquire this constant yiras Hashem, fear of Hashem. Again, fear meaning awe of Hashem. Ki hesach hadas ubitl ha'iyun hu hamafsid hagodol shelo. This, the other way, conversely, the other way around, is the absence of hesach hadas, it's called in Hebrew, removing one's focus, removing one's concentration. Again, this is a very difficult thing to do, but people on a very high level are able to, in one part of their mind, be constantly with this in their mind. But it's very easy to forget that, and it's true whether, in other words, this lack of concentration, machmas tordos o barotzon. A person there's two ways a person can remove his mind from thinking about this. First is that many times in life a person is caught up with tiridas, we call them, things that bother him, whether it's money problems or health problems, chalila, or problems with his children or whatever it is. There are many things in this world which the nature of them is to completely remove us from thinking about that Hashem is always there in front of me and I'm in fear of Him. And then the other thing, of course, is something which a person can actually do this willfully, chalila. Willful disregard. Any diversion of attention undermines this constant fear of Hashem. So even though it's difficult for us to, as we said last week, to remember what's above you, an eye that sees, and an ear that hears, and all your actions are written in the book. So even though these things are difficult to imagine, nowadays it's interesting that the Chofetz Chaim said, rather than the fact that we have all these wonderful inventions like the camera and the video camera and mass storage where you can store away, and now even AI, even all these things seem to, show a great increase in mankind, a development of mankind. But really they're just to fill the lacks of previous generations. In previous generations, these ideas were much more intuitive. An eye that sees, an ear that hears, and all of your actions are written in a book. Chavetz Chaim said in his day, the fact that there are now a telescope allows you to understand the concept. There's an eye that can see across the world, across the galaxy. And now with very powerful radio telescopes, it's possible to, quote unquote, see to the vast ranges of the galaxy. An ear that hears. It's possible now through radio, it was back in the day of the Chavetz Chaim, to hear what's going on the other side of the world. And all your actions are written in a book. Basically, the whole idea of a video is that everything is written down. But of course, this is a very sophisticated video, because not only what you do, but what you thought as well. So he suggests, and the idea is that rather than these things being advances, they are really aids to us to imagine and to be able to concretize ideas which for our forebears were self-evident. But nevertheless, it takes effort and action, as we said, and of course the thing that takes away from that is diversion. Diversion from these truths. Halamadnu she'ein hayira nilmedes ela min hakriya habilti nisekes. It has to be that a person, as we know by a king of Israel, is commanded that he should have a Sefer Torah and take it with him everywhere. A king has to have his own personal Sefer Torah and to take it with him everywhere he goes, and he has to read it and learn it all the time. The higher a person is, the more he has to remind himself of his lowliness compared with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. A king who's wont to see himself as somebody who's elevated, all the more so he has to have the means by which he can understand that he's really no more than flesh and blood, and to constantly remind himself that Klapei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with regards to Hashem, he is extremely mortal and he's passing away like everybody else. The other thing he says that you can lamadnu she'ein hayira l'nilmedes ela min hakriya habilti nifsekes. A person has to constantly study Torah, as we said with the king, and it says that he makes an interesting diuk here. V'usedaktek she'oma laman yilmad liyira. A person has to learn to fear. V'loma laman yira, in order that you should fear. In other words, this verse is expressing the way that specifically the degree of yira is not attained naturally. It's not something that some person has to learn yira. He has to introspect in it. He has to have hasmoda, like in learning Torah. He has to think and delve and constantly have this in his mind. It can only be acquired through habituation. Ve'ein limud lira ela barov hasmada b'Torah v'darchea b'li hefsek. The only way, as I said before, is a person can achieve this habituation on Yiras Hashem, is diligent study of the Torah and its ways without interruption. Now, he goes on to say, "V'hu sheyeh ha'adam mizboinen ma'ayin b'davar hazeh tomid." Constantly, a person has to think. In other words, when he sits, when he walks, when he lies down, goes to sleep, all the time he has to have this awareness. You have to constantly ad shikaba yikba b'daito amitas hadavar. Again, as with many things in life, a person has to constantly inculcate these ideas. The whole purpose that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us something called the meter of hatmada, which means habituation, is that we can train ourselves to be matmid, to habituate ourselves in things which are positive and life-giving. For example, on a very small level, nobody has to think about brushing their teeth in the morning or at night. Why? It's something that's ingrained into you. So similarly, the only way that you can get to this constant awareness, which to a certain extent becomes automatic, to a certain extent, is through a constant hatmada, a constant repetition, a constant inculcation into one's thoughts and one's very being, this idea that the Shekhinah is in front of me, that Hashem is watching me, and that His greatness fills the world, and I'm standing in His presence every single moment. It's interesting, he brings an interesting note here in the book that the Ramah, when opening the Shulchan Aruch, he starts out by this idea of, which really is at the end of the book at the end of Mesilas Yesharim. He starts by saying that he quotes Shivisi Hashem lenegdi somid, that a person starting out to learn the Shulchan Aruch, the code of daily law, how a Jew is supposed to conduct himself in this world. He starts off with this idea that I have placed Hashem in front of me constantly. And he says that a person, it's a central principle of Torah life and the way of the righteous, quote, the Ramah says, for the way a person sits, moves and acts when he's alone in his house is different from the manner he sits and moves and acts when he's in the presence of a great king. The manner of a person's speech is very different when he's in the company of only his family than when he's standing in the throne room. Certainly, the remark concludes, when one contemplates the great king, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that standing over him, observing all his deeds, he will immediately be seized by awe and humility. A person's every deed and his very comportment at all time must bear witness to the great truth that Hashem's presence is everywhere. So it's very interesting, he points out, that here at the end of the, the Mesilas Yesharim, this is the level that a person can only get to after going all the way through this book. But at the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, that's where he starts off. And I think the Rav Yecheskel Sana points out that because it's critical when a person, everyone to recognize that this exalted level is the goal of a Jew. That's what we're aiming for. And as I say, very few of us will reach this level. But the mere fact that we know such a level exists makes us different people. And maybe for a split second, maybe for once a day, I can train myself. Not at the time of davening, obviously, that's what a person should be thinking. But a person maybe can stop every day and just think to himself, I'm in the presence of Hashem. And maybe he'll alter a little bit the way he sits, or he'll alter a little bit the way he speaks. This is what we're talking about, that the Jew, when he comes to read the Shulchan Aruch to find out what's the laws, what are the halachot of a Jew's life in this world, in Olam Hazeh, he has to understand what is the purpose of all of these laws, where am I trying to get to? Okay, so we've now finished the section about Yira, and we're going to move on to the last section of the book, which is Kedusha, holiness. And really, holiness, Kedusha, he's going to say, falls into two sections. It's the highest level that a person can attain in this world. And even though there are, if you remember the Maimah, the Brisa of Reb Pinchas ben Yoeya, after Kedusha, there were two levels. There's Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, and Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. That's something which is completely beyond a person's ability to achieve. That's entirely a gift from Hashem. But we're going to see that actually Kedusha itself has two levels itself. One level a person can achieve, and the other level is also a gift. I once heard a mashal, a parable to explain this. Let's say, for the sake of argument, back in the day I used to use the Empire State Building as a mashal, but of course the Empire State Building now is relatively small compared with, let's say, Burj Khalifa. Let's say, I don't know, how tall is the Burj Khalifa? I have no idea, but let's say it's 250 stories. So let's say there was a competition. And the competition was that people have to run as far as they can and then walk. And anybody, the first one who gets to the top of Burj Khalifa, anybody who gets to the top of Burj Khalifa, it gets this tremendous reward. So, everybody starts off, you have, 50, 100, 200 people at the start, and slowly they drop out one by one, one by one, one by one. And finally, we're getting to the 240th floor, and there's just a couple of people, and then the rest of them drop out. And we get to the 247th floor, and there are two people, and then the other guy drops out, and then he gets to the 248th floor, and this guy is the only guy left, just can't make it any further. He's crawling up the stairs, and he finally gets to he just says, no, I can't go on, and he finally forces himself, and he turns around the bend, the corner, he just gets onto the 249th floor, and there's a sign there that says, if you've got this far, you can take the elevator. That's the idea of the two levels of Kedusha. When a person does his absolute maximum to be Makadesh himself, to sanctify himself, Hashem says you can take the elevator. Of course, the Moshel is not a very good Moshel, because basically the elevator doesn't take you one floor up. It takes you to infinite levels of closeness to Hashem. But that's the idea, that Kedusha is really divided into two parts, and we are now going to talk about the first of those parts as follows. Inyan Kedusha hu kofel, as I said, the subject of Kedusha is two. Dahainu tichilosa avoda v'sofa gumul. The beginning is work, and the end of it is reward. Tichilosa hishtadlus v'sofa matona. The beginning is effort, and the end of it is a gift. Vahainu she tiloso hu masha odem makadesh atzmo. The beginning is how a person does, he sanctifies himself. That's what the beginning is. V'sofa masha shemakdiv shemoiso. And the end of that process is him being sanctified from above. V'hu masha omru zichron levrocha. That's what it says in Yuma. Odem makadesh atzmo ma'at. If a person sanctifies himself a little bit, not 249 stories. Makadshimoiso harbe. So then they come and they sanctify him a tremendous degree. Milamata, from above, makadshimoiso milamala. If you sanctify yourself a little bit down here, then as we say, you get the elevator. Haishtadlus, but of course, it's not so easy to get to that level. This is the end of the book we're talking about. But nevertheless, Kedusha is this double process. Haishtadlus hu shieh ha'odam nivdal v'ne'etak min ha'chumrius legamrei u'mizdabek tomid b'chol eis b'chol shah be'elokov. Not an easy thing. The effort that's required is that a person should separate himself and disconnect himself from physicality completely, u'mizdabek tomid, and be completely stuck to, attached to, every day and every moment to his God. And that's why the Nevi'im are called Malachim. And he brings a posuk ba'achron, ki sifsei kohen yishmuru das, v'soira yavakshu mipihu. Ki malach Hashem tzavakoshu. The Kohen is this person who elevates himself from above, is going to be called a malach. He brings another posuk v'yuha malaviim malchei ha'elokim. They what's he changed it here? Translated. They insulted the quote unquote angels of God. So you see, we're talking about somebody who's very kodesh, reaches this level of an angel. Va'afilu b'shas his asku b'ma'asim hagashmiyim. Okay, now obviously there's a question here which we have to ask. Okay, how is a person can totally separate himself from physicality? A person's living in this world. A person has physical needs. He has to sleep, he has to eat. There are certain things he has to keep warm. There are certain physical, however much a person wants to separate himself from physicality, there's a limit to what a human being can do. So what does this actually mean? Says the Ramchal, Va'afilu b'shas his asku b'ma'asim hagashmiim. Even when a person on this level is connected, is involved in those necessary physical things that he has to be involved in. Mipas gufo, because his body has these needs. Hinei lo tazuz nafsho midvekuso ha'elyon. Nevertheless, the soul inside him doesn't shift from this complete attachment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even when he's doing the most physical things. As it says in the Posuk in Tehillim, Dovka nashi acharecha ki somcha yiminecha. My soul cleaves after you, for your right hand has supported me. V'amnam levi she'iev shala adam shi'hu es atzmo b'matzav zeh ki kaved hu mimenu ki sov sov chomri hu uvasav adam al kein omarti shesov hakadusha matana. And because it's impossible for a person to elevate himself through his own efforts totally to a place of complete detachment from the physical and complete attachment to Hashem, that's just not possible for flesh and blood, since after all he's not an angel, but he's a physical being, flesh and blood. So there, as we said before, the Kedusha is this combination, that a person does as much as he can below. Shesov Kedusha is the matana, and the end of the Kedusha is a gift. Ki ma sheyuchal adam lasos hu hishtadlus be redifas hayadia ha'amitis, v'hasmoda, haskola, b'kedushas hamase. That a person has to push himself, to exert himself, to understand the true knowledge of Hashem, and constantly delve into the sanctity of his actions, and this will set him on the path to Kedusha. However, the Sofu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yadrichehu b'derech hazeh shehu chovetz leleches bo, that Hashem will guide him in this way that he wants to travel in. V'yashre olav kedushoso, and he will be moshare, he will, what's the word in English? He will bestow on him, hashras shechina, he will mashre on him the kedusha, so his kedusha, Hashem's kedusha, and he will sanctify him. For oz yitzlach, and then this person will be successful. Biyodo zeh hadavar sheyuchal lios hadvei b'deikvus hazeh imo yisparach b'temidus. He will be constantly in touch, connected to Hashem. Lo yiman atov lo holchim b'samim. That Hashem does not hold back goodness from those who walk with Him in devotion. V'alkein, therefore, omru, as we said, we mentioned this Maimon Chazal before, Odom mevakesh atzmo ma'at, a person sanctifies himself a little bit. I mean, little bit is relatively little, obviously. We're not, this again, I have to keep reminding, we're talking about people on a very, very high level. Shuma sheyuchala Odom liknos b'tashtadluso. That is something which is physically possible. The limits of physical possibility. Then Mekadeshim Oisoy Harabe. They sanctify him greatly above the level that natural man can reach to. Shuhu Eza Sha'oiza Oisa Hashem Yisbarach Ukumo Shekasavno. That's as we read before. Hashem will come and give him this tremendous help. Let's just go on a little bit further. Hinei Ha'ish. Somebody who becomes sanctified in the Kedusha of his Creator. Now this is something which is fundamental to Judaism. We've seen this idea, but we're going to see this on an even higher level now. So we'll finish off with this idea now. There's an idea that, I'll translate this pasuk that it says in Pesachim, the Kohanim eat from the Korban, u'ba'alim miskaprim, and the person who brought the Korban, he received his kapara. The kapara that he receives is not just through the shechita of the animal. The essential kapara is when the Kohanim do something which is incredibly physical, they eat from the Korban. The idea here is that Judaism, unlike other religions, does not reject physicality. Not only it directs physicality, but on the highest level, even the most physical things become holy. The level we're talking about now, and he's going to go on to mention this, is not just the level we saw before, that a person is a tahor, he's pure, and a kodosh. What's the difference between somebody who's Torah and a kodosh? Somebody who's pure is somebody who manages to take, his material actions are nothing but unavoidable necessities. But a kodosh, these aren't unavoidable necessities. He takes the physical world and he elevates it. It's not just something like, well, what can I do? A person has to eat, a person has to sleep. No, his eating becomes holy, as we see very much from this Gemara in Pesachim. And in point of fact, there's an interesting side note here, which we'll finish with, that non-Jews, even though they were allowed to bring korbanos in the Beis HaMikdash, they were only allowed to bring one kind of korban, and that was a korban olah. A korban olah is called in English either an elevation offering or a burnt offering, meaning everything went up. To the non-Jewish mind, a sacrifice has to be, the word sacrifice is opposite, something which completely goes up. The idea of the priest eating from my offering in the non-Jewish mind looks like a kickback. Well, these priests are getting a bit of my offering. I understand things would go all up, go Total spirituality. The concept of being able to raise the physical to the level of spirituality is something which the non-Jewish mind does not embrace with ease. And that's why they were not allowed to bring the other korbanos. But as we saw before here, and this is the whole idea of Kedusha, and we'll carry on with this next week, B'ezrat Hashem. The idea of Kedusha is that the most physical action, the Kohanim eating from the korban, is how the Bailim, how the person who brought that korban receives his kapara, receives this spiritual elevation and attainment. We'll see you next week, B'ezrat Hashem.